You're listening to Kitchen Table Finance. Join Dave Shotwell and Nick Nauta as they cut through the complexity of financial planning and serve bites of investment advice that are both personal and practical.
Hey, Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Nick. How are you?
Podcast Friday, my friend. Doesn't get better than this. Hey, and summer's back.
It's 80 Summer is today. Here. Is it? Is it? Yeah. Well, there's about a 10-degree difference between you and me, but I'll take 70 over 80, so I'm happy.
There you go.
I'm happy with that. You can still wear jeans and be comfortable. That's my threshold.
80's too hot for you northerners.
That's right. That's right. Got winter in my bones.
Speaking of hot, we got a great podcast today, Dave. We are going to go over yours specifically, worst and best personal money moves. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more about young Dave Shotwell and some of the financial decisions that you made that you've probably learned some lessons from.
Yeah, and I'm willing to do this because I know your time is going to come. So turnabout will be fair play, and sometimes It's better to go first, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and by way of context, we've both, like every other human on the planet, have made lots of money decisions at this point in our life. Some were good, some were bad. These ones I'm going to mention, the good and the bad, have just kind of stuck with me over time as things that, boy, I wish I had that to do over again, or the lessons stuck with me, so.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think people assume that you and I being financial planners and having lots of experience means that we never screwed up along the way, right?
Oh, yeah. Clients are often surprised when you tell them about mistakes you've made or things you almost did, or we came out of high school just ready to go, right? We knew it all. We thought we knew it all, but.
It reminds me of growing up. I don't know if we've ever discussed this on the podcast or not, but my dad used to be a pastor for a Christian Reformed church, and my grandparents were missionaries. And so, of course, all of the church goers thought that the pastor was, basically perfect, right? Never made a mistake, never got angry. And I'm sitting there going, if you only knew.
If I could, yeah. I'm sure. So
financial planners are the same way, right? We make mistakes, we learn lessons, and we move on and try to get better. So
absolutely. So I've picked a few, and I'm probably cherry picking, but hey, here we go.
All right, let us have it.
So back in 2004, we owned a house that we knew wasn't going to work for us long term. And we found a house that we liked better for the long term. And we hadn't sold our original house yet. And it was 2004, and the housing market was doing pretty well, and interest rates were pretty low. And we talked to realtors and bankers and heard everything we wanted to hear about how we should be able to buy the new house that we wanted, and at the same time list our existing house, and we would sell it with no problem. And and it might take a month or two, but everything would be fine. And the bank was willing to do kind of a funky loan arrangement where we had a regular conventional mortgage for 30 years with a fixed rate, and a special short-term higher interest loan for the 20% down payment that we didn't have but would have as soon as we sold the other house, with the idea that we could turn around and pay that loan off as soon as we sold the other house.
Yep.
Well, we kind of hit the peak of the housing market, at least in our little area. The housing bubble kind of broke earlier than other places, and all of a sudden it was impossible to sell the other house after we had closed on the new house. And there we were, owning two houses for the better part of 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, in retrospect, it all worked out okay. The main takeaway that I often share with clients about that was just how stressful it was. It wasn't that we couldn't make the payments and cover the utility bills. It was more about how scary it was that maybe we couldn't, and just the feeling of wastefulness, right? Here we were with two, twice as much house as we needed with no use for the other part. And, we talked about renting out the old house. We talked about different things, different scenarios. And, in retrospect, if I knew it was going to be 2 years, I might have tried to find a renter, but it was always like, oh no, let's just lower the price again a little bit. And, by the time we sold that house 2 years later, I think our asking price was about 60% of what our original asking price was.
Wow.
Finally sold. Yeah. So it all worked out, but it was pretty stressful. It was pretty wasteful. And, it was another 20 some years before I made a housing transaction that I was proud of to kind of make up for it.
Wow.
so yeah, that was definitely like, of all the money things we've done over the years. I mean, there were times, when we were younger, when, we weren't sure how we were going to pay for diapers and formula, but that's just normal, like being young and having kids. Right. And, but this was kind of one of those things where we were both like within a month or two, we were both like, boy, we're smarter than this and we should have known better. Yeah. And it life goes on, but that's one that I've always thought, boy, to have that money in the bank at different times would have been pretty nice.
Yeah.
So live and learn, right?
So that's interesting. 2 years is a long time to be holding on to a second house. So, and actually kudos to you guys for, a lot of people wouldn't have been able to make it through, right? Like taking care of two houses when you only planned on taking care of one, and the mortgages and everything. So you had to have some good backstop. And I'm curious, like, what were some of the things that you did to make sure that you had enough for that beforehand to kind of get through that period?
Well, obviously discretionary spending was an issue. We thought, and neither one of us were really good. Like, we hadn't learned all the budgeting lessons that we know now too, so it wasn't, it was definitely stressful. I can't say like we went without things that, where it probably played out the most is that there were things we would have normally done to the new house. Yeah. The normal stuff when you move in, your furniture doesn't quite fit, those kind of things. And we delayed a lot of that for several years because, we had to get caught up then. And that's probably where it played out the most. But, we were both working 40 plus hours a week at the time. Our kids were young, but they weren't had lots of discretionary activities and things going on yet at that point. They were both pretty young. And, so it, I don't think it had any real adverse impacts on what we would have done otherwise, other than just feeling insecure about money and, feeling we didn't have a lot of margin there to make mistakes. So,
well, back in 2004, they were basically giving away mortgages. So, you did a decent job of making sure that you didn't overextend on the new house so that you could cover both payments, right? Because I'm sure they probably would have let you back then.
Well, and the one mortgage had an adjustable rate, and lucky for us, the interest rate environment was such that shortly thereafter, interest rates started to fall. Mm-hmm. We never had to worry about higher payments because of it. Oh, and that's another aspect of it that I guess when you ask about the longer term implications, when we did finally sell the old house, we didn't have enough to pay off that special higher interest, flexible, adjustable rate mortgage. So we ended up carrying that for a number of years, probably another 4 or 5 years, and just, making bigger payments on it and trying to get rid of it. But I always felt I hate to say lucky in the context of the financial crisis, but a lot of that played out during the financial crisis when interest rates went way, way down. And so the payments on that adjustable rate mortgage portion of what we did to finance the new house actually went down during that period and made it easier instead of harder. But boy, in 2006 or so, that was kind of part of the fear was that mortgage payment was going to keep going up, and it was already kind of a stretch. So, yeah.
Lots of great lessons there. Adjustable rate mortgages and the.
Oh yeah, I could talk for an hour about why that was uncomfortable, but just it was part and parcel of the whole problem.
Yeah, so for sure.
It's also interesting how that, like, I've had to be careful over the years. Like, whenever clients bring up a funky proposed real estate transaction, my first reaction is, oh gosh, no, don't do that. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I need to step back and say, okay, it's not the same situation. They're not the same people. We can talk about the pros and the cons, and we can talk about why I feel the way I do, but I've got to be careful not to be over biased the other way.
Yeah, for sure.
And
that's definitely one of the things as financial planners is obviously we have our own biases that we have to kind of think about when we're helping people figure things out for themselves.
Yeah,
right? There's
and
many ways to do something.
Yeah, and it's a sample size of one, so you gotta be careful. It's having your own experience be too overbearing on your advice giving.
For sure. So let's switch over to the other side, Dave. What's some of your best personal money moves that you recall?
Yeah. Well, I picked this one because it's kind of a closed loop. This is one where it was like a long-term savings plan that we've actually seen all the way through fruition, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like we've made good moves for our retirement. We've done it, but that's still a story yet to be written. Yeah. So we did what I consider, especially in the context of like where we were coming from and that it was all going on at the same time as what we were just talking about, is what we did to save for our kids' educations. And so when I look back on that, I'm pretty proud of the fact that we started 529 plans for the kids. I was brand new in this business. It was like one of the first things I did for myself that we were also doing for clients. My daughter was about 3 and my son was a newborn. And we committed right then to putting money away for their education. And it was at a time when, like I said, things weren't as nailed down in our own overall financial picture. There were other things that we could easily have been talked into other priorities.
Sure.
And, and we started small. I think when I first started, we were doing like $50 a month each and raised that to $100 each, not too long down the road. But that was a commitment at the time, $100 a month, $200 a month was a big deal. And, and I was still learning like the whole concept of long-term, compounding, especially the fact that this was I started in the industry in the midst of the tech crash, right? None of my clients had made a dime in the stock market. All we were doing was playing triage and trying to help people figure out if they were, if they had ruined it, if they, everybody was in a panic because so many people had taken more risk than they were comfortable with. And so it was a little bit of a leap of faith on my own personal part to say, hey, this is exactly what we're telling these clients they need, to trust in the long-term, compounding returns and not worry about what's going on right now. So it was kind of an interesting, can I put my own money where my mouth is kind of situation.
Yeah.
So it paid off though. And by the time my kids were in school, we had enough in those 529 plans to meet what our goals had been to fund from those. Now, we weren't trying to fund 100% of their college education from 529 plans. We had kind of our own, structure on how we were going to do that. But I was really, really proud of the fact that it worked out it was almost eerily well how it worked out.
Yeah.
So, and I did go back on my daughters, so 15, and then through college, so say 17 years or so, that she was invested. That included starting in the tech bubble crash and then investing all the way through the financial crisis. The average on her portfolio was a little over 6%. Mm-hmm. And, if you looked at it in context and the fact that we were using the Michigan 529 plan with what they call an age-based portfolio. So it started out when she was 3, it was all stock. And by the time she was 18, it was a much more conservative mix. I forget the exact mix, but, sure. You look at that arc and now, knowing what we do, 6% is, to me, that was a pretty solid return. For my son, I never was able to do the math because we actually added some lump sums to his at a couple different points, because then that was, he was, the heart of when we were putting money in his was like after, the mortgage mess up. And then later on when we were making a little more money, but I was able to put a couple lump sums in his during the middle of the financial crisis. So we were basically buying stocks on sale. All I can tell you is his return, like the return on his was north of 8.5%, but I've never, I've never nailed it down. But, again, a lot of it was serendipitous timing.
For sure.
So yeah, that's my biggest win, where I can say this, worked out as we planned, and, taking that long-term view was really, while it was difficult at the time as a young parent, it really did work out the way we wanted it to.
Yeah.
Without,
I think it's
go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think it's awesome that you went from the beginning of your career coming out of the tech and being like, I don't know if we should do this or not. Right. We're telling everybody else we should, to 2008 when you're like, hey, fire sale, sign me up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It only, well, at that point I figured, nothing left to lose. Right. But tongue in cheek, what you said the first time was better. But yeah, that has helped me when I talk to other parents with the goal of saving for college, to be able to again point at how it worked out for us. And again, kind of the opposite of the other story. I've got to be careful to say, timing had a lot to do with it, and your results may vary, but just the activity, the routine of plunking that money in there every month without thinking about it was really the key.
Yeah. Well, I think too, a great point that you made in kind of your success story here is oftentimes people feel like, well, I can't afford to contribute more than $50 or $100. And instead of just doing it when they're young, you just kind of talk yourself out of it. Even if you start with a small amount and build on it over the years, it will accumulate. It will give you options. And so I think you guys did a great job of just doing it.
The psychology of it is such that you do it for 6 months and you've forgotten about it. And then you can raise it again. And 6 months later, you'll have forgotten, that now you're putting $100 away instead of 50.
Right.
And pretty soon, if you're budgeting well, to a point, you can keep raising that, and the psychology works in your favor that way.
Yeah.
So
it is interesting how easy it is to trick our minds sometimes on things like that, right? Right.
So,
do it for 6 months and you'll just learn how to live without it.
Right. Yeah. And you won't even think about it. And because it's just gone. It's not there when you go to spend it. So that's, that's my biggest, fumble, and, kind of my biggest, at least to this point, success story. Sorry to disappoint all the folks who were expecting it to be. Well, I shorted, Gold or Bear Stearns in 2007, or bought puts on the S&P 500 in
Mm-hmm.
the right time.
Mm-hmm.
But no, nothing fancy, nothing exciting, just good old power of automated investing and avoiding, I think the big lesson I would say from the housing situation was, I think our biggest mistake was we saw something shiny and new that we wanted, and we only paid attention to the narrative that supported it from salespeople and folks with, not necessarily, that were more than happy to talk to us about the possible good outcomes, but nobody ever, pointed out the possible downside of it.
That's a fantastic point, Dave. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of times, we forget that, realtors just have a lot of experience, but they have an incentive to sell you a house. And they really have double incentive to get you to sell your house and buy another house, right?
Yes.
And the mortgage people love taking on new loans, and they're incented to get you loans. And so having that, what I always tell our clients is, I want you to come to me with all of your financial questions, because my job is to be objective, right? My job is to not get emotionally attached or incentivized by what you're doing, and think more of it in terms of, here's the good things that could happen, here's the bad things that could happen. Let's weigh them. Let's make a plan B, and then we'll make a decision and move forward.
Right. Exactly. And
not to say that your decision would change per se, but you probably would have thought about it differently too,
Right. And that's the key. You don't want surprises. I think that's one thing I would say with clients overall is, if you help them weigh the pros and the cons, at least the cons aren't surprises then if they happen. Like, holy crud, no one told me this could be the,
right.
It was always within the realm of possibility, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Awesome, Dave. Well, thanks for sharing today. This has been great.
Well, your turn will come, my friend. So,
tune in for Nick's Best and Worst coming soon.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave.
This is a Zedia Media production.